Hi everyone. So today we are going to start our adventure into small group communication. So if you don't have notes out already, please get those out and take some notes on what we talk about here today, because the ideas here will build on throughout this week and as you go into your group speech. Just to kind of look forward, we're going to be talking about concepts and practicing with those concepts and getting into your groups this week and figuring out what that looks like. Next week will primarily be work time for your speech, and then we will give speeches the following week before we start our debate unit. So that's just kind of what's coming down the pipe. So one thing I want you to think about as we go through today is think about groups you've been in before. Think about how effective or ineffective the communication has been and maybe why that would be the case. So small group communication, let's start with the definition. And the definition that we're going to work with for this class is the interaction of three or more independent individuals working together towards a common goal. So clearly here, we have quite a bit going on, so I'll give you a second to write. So if we break this down, interaction means that it's not just three individuals doing something. They have to be able to interact with each other at some point in the process. And they have to be able to work independently, but also together. And there's the other big thing here is having some type of common goal. Clearly, the common goal for the speeches in this class, or for this class, is a speech that you're going to do. Other small groups may have other goals. So thinking of specific examples of groups you've been in, you can think about, okay, well, there are a number of different goals a group can meet. So if we think of some examples of what makes a small group, sports teams often are great examples of small groups, because you're talking about, take a basketball team, for example, about 15 or 16 individuals that are work together, 5 of them on the court at one time, but you have bench players that help support that through practicing, through games. So clearly have a common goal. That goal is winning. Clubs and other, non-competitive activities, I think of, the speech and debate teams, there's a lot of individual work that goes into it, but then as a team, we come together and do some work. Classrooms are a very unique example of small group communication. The classes here, oftentimes sometimes you get smaller classes, sometimes you get larger classes. It just kind of depends. And go ahead and jot down any other examples you can think of in your notes. A question that often comes up is it says interaction of 3 or more independent individuals. So, okay, well, how big is still a small group? So depending on who you look at, anywhere between 3 and 18 or 21 is really considered small group. You could get a little higher in the 20s if you want to, but you really want to stick to that 3 to 18, 21. Ideally, 5 to 7 is a pretty good number, maybe 9. If you get much bigger than 9, then you start getting into a bunch of other issues, such as cliques forming within the group and stuff like that. And the last thing I want to say about this, too, is that you want to try to have an odd number in a group, because groups have to make decisions, and so you want that decision-making process to be able to be made. Now, due to the size of various classes, I was not always able to make odd-numbered groups for this class, but that's typically why you see a lot of odd numbers when it comes to groups. So let's talk about roles in groups and what those roles mean. So first, we have the leader. So the leader of the group establishes the goals of the group, sets agendas for group meetings, and facilitates discussion. The role of the leader isn't always to be the person that says, here's what we're going to do. The role of the leader is much more of a facilitator. So honestly, think of a teacher in a classroom. Now, while different teachers do teach in different ways, and for example, today I'm not being a very good facilitator, I'm simply delivering instruction to you. Oftentimes, teachers function as facilitators of discussions, for example, or facilitators of learning. The leader, that doesn't mean the leader doesn't get a voice, but their overall goal should be to manage the group, not necessarily impose their will on the group, but manage it, listen to everyone, get everyone's input before decisions are made. We also then have the recorder. Now, the recorder is the person that takes notes of what is or has happened at group meetings. So, think about this person as the note taker. If there are any type of daily assignments during this class that that you may need to complete, then this recorder would be the one person that maybe would record the answers for that. So I am going to ask that you identify a leader and recorder. So those are two roles you really want to think about assigning. Now, a couple of other roles that we want to talk about is the task manager, for one. This is the person that keeps the group on task. Obviously, anytime you're talking about meeting as a group and you're talking about working on something for 55 minutes at a time or even 30 minutes at a time, it's really easy to get distracted and get off task, and that's okay. You can't be only task-oriented the whole time. You do need to think about the social interactions in your groups, or otherwise the group gets a little boring to be a part of. But there should be someone within the group, the task manager, that dictates, okay, this side discussion has gone as far as we should allow it to today. Let's get back on task. So while I won't ask you to identify that person, I would ask that someone's doing that every time you meet. And it can be a different person. Maybe one day it's the leader, one day it's the recorder, one day it's the group member that doesn't have another role. So that it can be very flexible. And then the final one I want to talk about is devil's advocate. So this is the person that ensures the group is considering all sides of the topic before making a decision. You don't want to simply make a decision because everyone says, yeah, that sounds great. You want to think through your decisions and think through the implications of making those decisions. So the devil's advocate serves as okay, it sounds like we all have this decision made, but let's think about the other side. That doesn't mean that they have to be mean or rude about it. It just means that that person's role is, let's not jump to a decision. Let's think about, is this the best research to put into our speech? Is this the best course of action? Is this the best use of our time? So the devil's advocate can really serve that role. And much like the task manager, the devil's advocate can rotate from day to day, from meeting to meeting too. So it's not just the same person that is getting on everyone's nerves the entire time. So like I said, these are just 4 roles. Depending on what textbook you might read, you could see a variety of different goals. These are all what we call task-oriented goals. There are definitely some social roles that we're not going to get into a huge discussion on, but if you were to ever take a college course on this, and there are entire semester-long college courses on communicating in groups, in small groups, then you would get into much more of those social roles as well. Just know that you're together in these groups for about 2.5 weeks, and you have something that will be graded, so keep that in mind. I want to spend a minute to talk about groupthink, and this is really where the devil's advocate comes in. So you hear the word groupthink, and you may think, wow, that sounds like it might be a pretty positive thing. We want to get to a point where the group is thinking together like a group. Well, if we look at groupthink, it actually occurs when everyone in the group agrees without considering the implications of the other side of the issue. So sometimes groups, for whatever reason, they get together and, wow, yeah, Johnny had a great idea. Let's just go with Johnny's idea without thinking about anything else. And you know what? Sometimes that's can be a really positive thing. Sometimes it's not, though. And so you really have to be careful with that. And so groupthink is typically viewed at as negative, because if you're not thinking through the other side, then something might happen that could negatively impact you, negatively impact your group. And so a couple of examples that I have here, the Challenger disaster. So in the 1980s, the Challenger was a shuttle that a space shuttle that was going up to the internet, going into low orbit, and it was supposed to take off. And the flight kept getting pushed back and back and back. And there were a lot of cool things that were happening. So a civilian teacher was going to be going into space for the first time. And for the first time, we were going to have a live video feed from the shuttle to Earth. And during President Reagan's State of the Union address, they were actually going to show this live feed. And so there was a lot of pressure from the White House to make sure the Challenger took off. And weather stuff had pushed it back and back and back. And finally, it was the morning of the speech. They had to take off or it just wasn't going to happen. Well, it was particularly cold in Cape Canaveral, Florida on that February morning. And shortly after the shuttle launched, it exploded and killing all 7 crew members on board. And what was found out later was there was actually some information about the O-rings that held the fuel in the rockets, those white rockets on the side of the center rocket, that at cold temperatures, they wouldn't seal properly. So essentially what happened is after takeoff, jet fuel was going everywhere and it caused everything to just disintegrate as it was leaving the atmosphere. And it's an example of groupthink because there was so much pressure that no one was saying, hey, this is a bad idea. Even though they had the data in front of them, no one spoke up. No one was the devil's advocate to ask, hey, maybe we shouldn't be doing this. Sports teams can be another example, and I mean that maybe more from a hazing kind of, well, we always do this to freshmen, so we should do it. A lot of ways, the groupthink that happens in terms of the homecoming tradition with I'm a Little Teapot here at U-High, that's groupthink. No one says, well, what is this doing to the psyche of freshmen? And then, sophomores become freshmen and they say, well, who cares? Because we had to go through it, so everyone should have to go through it. And once again, good, bad, or indifferent, there's no one saying, maybe we shouldn't be doing this. Let's at least think about those implications. So that's groupthink. On the flip side, what we want to shoot for is what's called synergy. And this is where the group is able to effectively transition from individual to group work. So essentially, I'm in a group with Johnny and Jessica, and we all have individual tasks that we need to get done. We come together as a group, we do the group work together, and then we go back to doing our work individually. Synergy is when the group, another way to think about it is everything's going smoothly, all the pistons are firing, to use an engine metaphor, everything is going as great as you can. Synergy is what we shoot for. It's rarely actually achieved. We want to avoid groupthink, we achieve to reach synergy. So let's talk about how groups develop. And so what I mean by this is not, how do groups get put together? But once groups are together, what kind of stages do they go through? And so there are actually 5 stages that I want to talk about. So first is the forming stage. This is the orientation stage. This is the, hi, who are you? How are you doing today? How's that weather outside? The small talk, the gauging everyone's interest level. So the forming stage is this very basic beginning stage. Then we go into storming. Storming is where conflict occurs for group roles. So Johnny, Jessica, and I formed, we got to know each other, and then all of a sudden, Johnny wanted to be group leader and so did Jessica, but we only need one group leader. So that conflict can come out. And other interpersonal conflicts can emerge as well, initially dividing up work or deciding on what is the real goal of this group. If one group member has one idea and another group member has another idea, then we already see some conflict forming. And this also comes about problem solving. So typically with a group, there's some type of problem that we're trying to solve. So we need to figure out how do we best solve that problem. And so conflict can emerge around that as well. Then we get to the norming stage. This is where group routines are formed. So, okay, we're going to meet every day at 8 a.m. in room 246 or whatever time this class occurs for you. this person is going to bring cookies to every meeting, or we are going to rotate bringing food to every meeting. Those different routines become part of what we do. There might still be some conflict that emerges, well, Johnny forgot to bring cookies on Johnny's day to bring cookies, and that's okay. You have to work through that conflict as you go. Then we get to the fourth stage, which is performing, and this is where we switch between methods of work flawlessly. Essentially, we're achieving synergy. We're going from that individual work to the group work, back to the individual work. People are actually doing their individual work before they come to the group meeting to do some group work and then go back to that individual work afterwards. And then the last stage is adjourning. I know it doesn't match the other ones. And this is the termination of the group. So all things must come to an end. And groups terminate for different reasons. Maybe they've met their goal. Maybe their group has been so dysfunctional that they just can't work towards a common goal, so the group ends. Classrooms, we end because the semester ends. Sports teams end because a group of seniors graduates and a new group of freshmen comes in. There are all kinds of reasons that a group can be terminated. Now, one thing I want to point out about this is forming, storming, and norming happen for almost every group. To get past norming to performing, though, that doesn't always happen. Sometimes you get to that performing stage and something happens and you end up back at storming. Your group norms have been maybe abandoned and there's new conflict. So that new conflict occurs, then you get to norming, then you get to potentially back to performing. Sometimes we never get to performing. Sometimes groups never get past the storming phase and they have to adjourn. So this is it's not a step-by-step process so much as it's unique to each group, and each group has to deal with that in their own way. So today, as you get into your groups, you're going to be doing some forming, some storming, and some norming. Hopefully, as we get into the group speech assignment, you see some performing, and then obviously, once the group speech is over, then that's when your groups will adjourn. So, your task for today is you will get into your groups. Those groups are posted in Blackboard. You will then choose a leader and a recorder. You can decide on how you want to do that, however you want. If you want the oldest person to be the leader or the youngest person, or you want to take a vote, or everyone wants to say, yeah, hey, Johnny or Jessica should be the leader, then that's okay. I will ask you tomorrow to let me know who your leader and who your recorder of your groups are. So just have that in mind. The leader will be the person that is responsible to communicate with me for picking speaking order, for any issues that are coming up in your groups, for me to check in with your group. I'll just focus on checking in with your leaders. Then the next four things, you have the rest of class today, and you'll have some time tomorrow to do this as well, and that is choose a team name, choose a team motto, create a team handshake that every member of your group is a part of, and then create a team flag. It can be hand-drawn or digitally created, but it must be a standard sheet of paper. For all of these, please remember they have to be school appropriate. I will say no to team names if I think that they have an innuendo in them of sorts, or for some other reasons it seems school appropriate. So if you do have any questions, hold on to those for tomorrow. I will be back then. And in the meantime, get into your groups and have fun with it.